Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where I get to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in our communities. What do they do to get started? And what are they doing to stay there? Oh my goodness, are you in for a treat today as I am bringing you another special guest? And if you've ever wanted to be a better negotiator, today's your day. So you need to stay tuned here as I'm getting to talk to okay, I'm going to say this now, Linda, because this sounds a little bit different now. Hall of Fame speaker,
Can you
Linda
believe it?
Swindling. Linda is the
Oh,
founder of Journey On. She's a keynote speaker. She's author of, I think I saw 20 books, but I think there's probably more, many books.
yeah.
But her best-selling book, I've got it in front of me. If you're listening, I'm holding it up. If you're watching the show, it's Ask Outrageously, The Secret to Getting What You Really Want. And what I'm really excited about is Linda's going to be speaking once again at the HR Southwest Conference. Linda, so you're glad to have you on the show. How you doing?
Oh, great. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for asking me.
Okay, so a couple of things. First thing, I always like to start out the show with a moment when I might have met my guests or maybe when they came into my path. I want to see if you remember this. I had to write this down because I was reflecting on this. And we've known each other for a long time. We're both
Hmm.
members of NSA, North Texas. But this moment was when you were speaking at Dallas HR back when we had big, huge 300-person luncheons at I think it was at the Crown Plaza. And it was, you were speaking on complainers and energy drainers. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember going to those luncheons. Bruce, you've always kind of been in my life, HR wise. So I always remember. I'm glad you brought that up though. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that moment. And I remember I have watched you and your journey and enjoyed watching you and learned from you since. Another reason this is great timing because I just want to hit on this real quick. You are newly inducted into the National Speakers Association Hall of Fame. How did that feel?
Oh, surreal. I knew about it for a while. So, but you can't tell anybody. It's top secret.
Okay.
So my family flew in, my son and his girlfriend, and my daughter took off work from Colorado Springs and drove to Denver and brought her boyfriend, and Greg, my husband, was there. And it was to receive the Hall of Fame in front of a hall of family and friends was
Mm.
just so meaningful.
That's fantastic. I did not know your family was there. I also saw a couple of other people that I recognize that also got inducted. Don Yeager, I like to kind of follow him and
Yeah.
his podcast. He's phenomenal. And John Petz, who I've
John
known for a while.
Petz.
He was
Yeah.
a speaker at the Texas Sherm Global Conference last year.
Right. He's great.
Yeah.
And also, John Register got it and Cy Wakeman.
And
And it
Cy
was just,
Wakeman.
yeah. So people that you say, wow, because we don't know who got it until the rehearsal night. Isn't that
Oh,
amazing? So none
yes.
of us, yeah, I
How
was like,
fun.
what?
How
So that was a
fun.
lot of fun. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, we're going to
Yeah.
get into your topic because you're going to be speaking at the HR Southwest Conference in October on the topic of Ask Outrageously. But before we get into that, I would love to hear, like, I know you, Linda, but there's probably some things I don't know about you. I would love to hear the Linda Swindling story. Like, where did you grow up and how in the world did you get into speaking and coaching and training and all of that?
Well, Bruce, I was born in St. Louis, Ferguson, Missouri, which people then found out about, right? And nobody knew about it. And then we moved with my dad. He moved to TI, which a lot of people have been moved with
Hmm.
TI. And when I was, in grade school. And so I grew up in Dallas, in Richardson. And I actually had a performance background. So the speaking isn't that far off. I was
Hmm.
theater arts, but a lot of dance. I was on a dance company and went to New York for a little bit. And what's interesting is I went to journalism school and then went to law school. So all of the, people say, well, how'd you get into speaking? Maybe I just left it for a while and came back. What's interesting too is that HR Southwest played a very big role in me
Hmm.
becoming a speaker.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was an employment attorney. And I
Okay.
will tell you, my whole firm dissolved with a Warren notice. For those of you who know about Warren, the Warren Act, I went to another firm and I was promoting employment because I did employment law. And I couldn't, since I was paying for everything myself, I could not afford to go to the conference, I didn't think.
Okay.
But I could afford at that time to go to the trade show. So I paid for the trade show entry and walked around to see what offerings there were. And while I was there, I met a volunteer. And they said, well, next year, if you want, you might want to volunteer and maybe you could come to a session or do some things. And so I was an introducer. And then after that, and at that conference, are you ready? I met my business coach.
Wow.
Elaine, it was Siciliano, then it's Elaine Morris now. And Elaine and I connected and we worked together for a while. And she said, finally, what is it that you enjoy about law? Because I'm not seeing it, right? And I told her, and she said, and I said, basically, I like helping them avoid those lawsuits. I like doing those manager training, leaders training. And she said, are you any good at it? And I said, well, I've spoken for what was the TEC now, Texas Workforce Commission. I said, I've spoken for them. I'm one of their highest rated people, I've got, and she said, so you're good at it. And I said, I think so. And she said, well, you could just do that and write books. And I said, no more handbooks, no more. She said, no, you could just speak and write books. And so she sent me to NSA North Texas. So yeah, HR Southwest is where I met her.
Wow.
A gazillion years ago. I mean, we're talking over 2 decades, probably almost 30 years ago, I met her. Can you believe that? And I left law and became a speaker. And my goal was to speak at HR Southwest, and I did. And so after I'd been an introducer and, a volunteer, then the year or two later, I spoke.
That is fantastic. That is such a great story. I tell
Yeah.
people all the time, it's more than a conference. Like
It
it's
is. It's a
land
community.
of connections.
It is. And, some people have asked me, why do you always go back? Do you get that much business?
Yeah.
I did. I have gotten my biggest client came from HR Southwest years ago, but I've gone just because of that community. They've helped me write these books. They've filled out, they gave me questions with the complainers book. They gave me questions to avoid hiring complainers. So I have a real heart for HR professionals. One, they kept me from malpracticing when I was doing employment law. And they said, you can't do that, But the other is they were there and they supported me. So I will probably always be willing to go back, if I can, especially our conference.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. A lot of people will go for a long time and then they just kind of stop going, but you have to be intentional about going back. And every time I go back, I meet somebody new. Or I learn
Wow.
something new, or it's just continuous growth for me. And I just love that. And we're going to get into that. I definitely want to do that. You mentioned you met your business coach, Elaine. I always like to before we get into the topic, I always like to ask my guests, like, like, I don't know, maybe who are a couple of other mentors that helped you get to where, I mean, you're a Hall of Fame speaker now. That means they say when you're at the top of the mountain, you're really at the bottom of the next, but that's the pinnacle. And so, and when I talk to high performers such as yourself, they have that common thread. They have people that have helped them get to where they are. Share a couple of people that's helped you along the way, and what was it about him?
Sure. Sure. And what's so interesting is HR professionals and others, but mainly have said, who are your mentors? And I've had mentors in different elements of my business. And I think we try to think that they're all universal. So Diana Boer, who has written all the books in the world. Yeah, she helped me with books. Do you know Howard Putnam? He's a former CEO of Southwest Airlines and former CEO of Braniff. When we were in leadership, we were on a board together, and he just helped up my game as far as a leader. I can remember him saying, you look like you have a question. I said, yeah, they told me I should wait a little bit. And he said, NSA elected you to represent them. You need to speak up. I don't care if you agree with me or anybody at this table. If you have a question, you ask. Joe Charbonneau, who was a speaker in Dallas, he said, you have to give before you get. And so many people on, just little things like human resources, or it could be something like, how do you dress, or how do you use your voice? Lori Allen, who's a friend of ours, she got on a TV set with me and said, okay, let's make this so that you don't have these big eyes and and just calm it down. So
Yeah.
I think that's the thing is your mentors, we try to get them to be everything, and that's not right to them. and it's probably not helpful to us. So what do you want to learn? And then ask for who's approachable and who could help me.
Hey, I want to ask you this question real quick. As you're speaking here, I was thinking, okay, so Elaine said, "Hey, you should try this. And write
Mm-hmm.
some books and do some
Mm-hmm.
training, things like that." But today you do many, many, many speaking events, keynote events. Was there like a moment during your career, and you probably thought about this since you were newly inducted into the Hall of Fame. Was there a moment where you said, you know what, I really like this? Because, I mean, you were in law school, you have this journalism back, you have all of this diversity of backgrounds, but you chose the path of speaking. And to many people, as you know, speaking is very like, oh, I could not do that. You got up, and today you're an expert in that area. Was there a moment when you found your lane, when you found your calling?
Yeah. And Bruce, I had to remember it. I
Mm,
think that was it. I did some purpose work. What was I put here to do?
mm,
And part of the activity was to go back. When were you in the flow? And the
mm,
time I was most in the flow, the time that I felt most alive was when I was in front of a large group of students. I was the president of what was Student Foundation. It's our alumni board at Texas Tech now, the student
okay.
alumni.
Yeah, guns
And
up.
guns up, right? And we were talking about, saving the museum on
Mm,
campus
mm,
and what we were going to do to show student support. And there was a moment then when I was talking, it was meaningful, it was to a group of people, it was engaging them and encouraging them.
mm,
And it had a purpose.
mm,
And when I went back, those times when I felt the most in the flow were those times when I was in front of a group, encouraging them to do more than they thought was possible, or that they really even knew, and to go out there and do it. And when I remembered that, then I could track going forward. So that was the time when I put it all together. And sometimes, we're trying so hard to go forward or go back and see, when did
mm.
you have energy? When were you really on? When did people say, wow, that made a difference? And then the big thing for me was the results. We had bigger results than anybody dreamed of. And that's why I love the results. I love to see what people do.
I love all of that. Okay, I've got a full page of notes here,
Okay.
Linda. If you are listening right now, you need to have your pen out. You need to have your journals out. You need to take some notes. This is so good. Remember, that's what I wrote down. Remember, reflect. Like, when did you have that energy? And that will help drive you towards what your calling is. And so I love that. This is fantastic. Hey, let's talk HR Southwest Conference here. How many years have you spoke there? Do you
I
recall? I
was
mean,
trying to count it up. I started, well, where we talked about it was the mid-90s is when I
okay.
went. So
Wow. A
forever,
long time.
right? Forever. And then sometimes, and those of you who've put in to speak, sometimes you get chosen, sometimes you don't. So
Mm,
there were some times I didn't, or sometimes
yeah.
I was busy during that time, but on and off for that many years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Can you
glad you
believe it?
shared. I'm glad you shared that because I do have speakers who will come to me and say, "Yeah, I wasn't chosen this year." I'm like, "Hey, there's been times I haven't been chosen." And
Yeah.
so it's just for however it lines up that year. Let me ask you this. Let's talk about your session here. And again,
Yeah.
I have your book. It's autographed. It says "Go Bruce." I love it. Ask outrageously. But the secret to getting what you really want, I want to ask you about that session. Like, talk about that session. Like, why should someone listening right now, and they're going to be going to the conference, what should they expect?
Usually when they attend, they're expecting to get ahead in their own career or do something better for themselves or learn how to negotiate. I hear a lot of people say, I'm not a negotiator. They're more on the negotiator line than negotiator, right? And if you come to the session, I want you to put on two caps. One
Okay.
is what do I need to do better? But the other is, do my people know how to do this?
Hmm.
And that's the piece. You know that I speak on leadership topics. Everything is, around those communication leadership topics. My twist is, how can you do it and keep it logical so we don't get so emotionally engaged? So whether it's stopping the complainers or, growing your leadership or even customer service, how do you treat it like a negotiation?
Hmm.
So when you go in there, if you come to this session or you listen to it later, what is it that you could do? What framework could you put it in That makes it more of a negotiation. Then it's not about you. It's about making this proposal. It's about making this suggestion. And I want you to think bigger in all of these sessions where you go for yourself, but then say, who besides myself
Mm.
in my organization needs this information? And there will be a session or two, and you think, this is what we're not doing.
Mm.
And it's so funny. HR professionals so many times will say, oh, well, this isn't in my lane. No, you work in human resources and you're at a conference and you know what's good. And if you see something that could help the manufacturing arm, or you see something that could help your sales team, or you see something that could help your leaders, say, I haven't usually been asked for this, but I'm going to say I got some notes on this, or I heard this speaker, or I found this book, and I think this might help your department based on what you're telling me. And that's where we find our value. You really think about it. So, as a human resources professional, as someone who is expected to know things about people and helping them do better, use your whole perception. If it's helping you, could it help someone else? Or is it something else that you can bring back?
Yeah, I love this. I wrote down, think bigger, but this is bold here. But who besides me needs
That's
this?
exactly it.
And as you share that, I think about when I took the certification for my HR certification, how Barbara Hoover said, you got to know the business. And as I think about that, you said HR, it may not be your lane, but HR is in every lane because they are
Exactly.
working with people,
And
right?
because if you haven't said something, let's say we're in benefits, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
we see something that could help the marketing team.
Yeah.
The fact that you've never said anything about it, and
Mm,
you come to the marketing director or your contact and you say, I saw something based on something you had said in a meeting and a thing, I think this might help you.
mm,
All of a sudden they're like, oh, thank you.
mm.
You'll be shocked. You'll be shocked at the value.
Hey, I want to ask you a question here. So the topic is after your book, Ask Outrageously. Uh, where did that come from? Like, have you ever asked outrageously?
Oh yeah. I apparently do it all the time. Um,
Talk about that.
yeah, well, it's a topic because I was working with a sales team and they weren't asking and they weren't
Mm,
willing to change. And so I double dog dared them to go and ask outrageously in a mall. I gave them $20 and I said, come back with more than $20. Out of the 5 groups, one group went down and drank with their $20. That's how they ask outrageously. One group purchased a gift certificate for $20 and came back. One group added money to it. And then 2 groups came back with over $100 worth of value.
mm,
Why? They asked. They asked, they asked, they asked. We couldn't get the concept across. And so I got mad because their leader was mad. He's like, I can't get him
mm,
to do it. So we did it. And
mm,
what ended up happening was the people that were willing to stretch a little bit and
mm,
ask and be vulnerable
mm,
were also the better salespeople.
I love
And so
that.
I was asked, my friend Dave Lieber said, do a TEDx talk. And I was like, okay, I was very nervous. And the person I was working with at the time, Zan, said, what have we not, talked about? She said, what have you have no video on? And I said, well, I do this activity, Ask Outrageously.
Mm,
And sure enough, we started, when I was chosen later, we did a survey. We asked when people didn't ask. And my big not ask, I think you know that story, is when I didn't ask Jay Leno for a picture.
Okay,
I
for all
had
the
the
for all
prime
the
time.
listeners right now, I want you to tell that story real quick because that's one of my
Yeah,
favorite
yeah.
stories with you.
Well, I was with a group of people and we were in California, a group of national speakers,
Yeah.
association members. And Jay Leno came out and I raised my hand and he pointed to me and I was first. And I asked him a like me question, which a lot of us do. We
Yep.
soft pedal, right? And I said, Jay, what's hard about your job?
Mm,
He said something, made a joke.
mm.
And then I was going to slide in and ask for what I really wanted, which was a picture with him. But before I could do that, he moved on to the next person. And he said, yes, you, ma'am. And she said, can I have a picture? And he says, yes. And then she's writing down. He looks back at me and he says, that's what you really wanted, isn't it?
Oh.
And I went, and I started staying up. He goes, well, she asked.
Mm,
And that stayed with me that I had the opportunity, but I didn't
mm,
ask.
mm,
And when I did that, When I did the research, we asked almost 1,200 people, has there been a time you've missed out? You could have been first and you missed out. And they said, yeah. Many, many people said, I missed out on my opportunity. So we did some research around that, and that's how that whole concept came about. Now, the rest of the story too, don't you, Bruce?
The rest of the story.
Yeah, he came to Dallas to do a program, and we started reaching out, called his 3 offices, and finally got a phone call. And Helga, who worked with him, said, "Is Linda Swindling a stalker?" And Zan said, No, let me tell you the story. She goes, "Oh no, we know the story." I'd heard it so many times. She's not a stalker. She can come to the green room while he's there and get a picture. So just keep asking.
Yeah, I love that.
Ask, because they're not going to see it on their own, and your companies aren't.
I love that. Paul Harvey, the rest of the story.
I know that my dad and I used to listen to that all the time.
Hey, I want to ask you this, and there's some information in this book. I love a lot of it. About my page I turn to is about the low hanging fruit. It talks about secrets of getting what you really want. But I just real quick, I want to touch on this because a lot of times we ask, and we don't get. Well, you mentioned you didn't get picked for one of the years to speak. I've been the same way. How do you like form that resilience to, or maybe give a tip or something around how do you like strengthen that resilience to bounce back?
Here's the thing. If you look back and you asked and you did not receive, a lot of times something else came your way. And if they don't know, it'll never happen for you. So if you wanted to give more presentations, you're talking about presentations, you could ask your boss, "Hey, I love presentations. Could I give presentations?" And the boss may say, "Well, not this one." But then they've remembered in the back of their mind, you are interested in presentations, and you might find a request, or you might find, "Why don't you go to this class?" All of a sudden you've put it out there. But if you keep it in your mind, and this, HR people, we know this, right? We know that those employees need to come and tell us what's going wrong, right? Good, bad, left, right. I'm not in the right fit. I'm in a perfect, whatever it is, because we're not mind readers. Well, how are the people that work with us going to be mind readers? So that's probably the biggest tip is go ahead and put it out there. And if they say no, and remember, if you're not hearing no, you're not asking for enough. Let me say that again. If you're not hearing no, you're not asking for enough. And when you hear no, don't go, "Oh, they said no." When you hear no, you say, "I heard you say no," very respectful. "Can you tell me about that? Can you tell me about that?" And as they talk, and we'll talk about this in the session, but as they talk, different things come out that then gives you something to respond to. But we know how to do this with others. We know how to get them talking. It's so interesting when it concerns us or when it concerns us stretching outside our boundaries. It's like sometimes we forget. Forget all that we know about communication to people. And, well, it's about me, so I can't talk about it. No.
Yeah.
It's how are you ever going to know if you don't ask?
Hey, I want to ask, and I gave you a few questions before we jumped on to record, but here's a few questions I've been asking today, and I haven't given you those questions, but I have another question. I was just thinking about this just now. Is like I was thinking about success. Like, what is a successful session looks like at a conference? Maybe share maybe one or two things that you see great speakers do, something you do that will always have success, and also what are a couple of misses you see from speakers? Any thoughts
Yeah.
around that?
Well, years ago, a client came to me and said, "You have so much information. We can't process it all." So then you have a choice. Well, I think this is important and this is important. So part of it is deciding what's the most important for that audience at that time. And you need to have something to follow up with people because it takes several exposures before you ever get it for many of us. A small keynote, it can get you thinking, but it's not going to change your behavior. So one of the things that's always been, kind of walking the balance beam line of what can you do? You can't sell at a lot of these conferences.
Right.
They've paid you to be there, or you've signed an agreement to, like HR Southwest, you sign an agreement not to sell. That said, people want more of what you're talking about, or they wouldn't have sat in the session. They spent their whole time in this very valuable conference. So if you can give them a way to get more information, here's some other resources, here's a place you can go. I think that's a big miss when we don't do that.
Mm.
And, you know, people don't have to get the other resources. They can say no, but you have to give them that opportunity or you're missing.
Yeah.
That's a big one. And where do they make the biggest mistakes? Oh, you know, they spend most of the time, the first third of the time, talking about why they have the ability to speak here. You know, what's my proof, all my background. Nobody cares. They read the bio. You were chosen. They respect the people who chose you. Get to the point that's going to affect me. What's in it for me as an attendee? Why am I here? So I would think that too. It's, don't cram too much in, give them a way to go and process and get more. And that's what the books are about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why I wrote the books was so people could go back and say, what'd she say there?
Yeah.
But also, don't show up and throw up all over them about yourself.
Good tip. I love that. I heard a guy share one time, don't spill all the candy. Just give them a piece of candy. Don't just throw it at them. So
because
I love
I
that.
can't process it. I can't.
Yeah.
Can you process it? All of
No.
that stuff and it's
No.
like, ugh.
I will tell you, as a speaker, one of the hardest things for me is I put together a presentation, taking slides out.
Oh yeah,
Like you just mentioned that, like, you know,
so hard.
you can't give them everything. You got to stay dialed in on something.
Well, or they ask a question and you say, is that important to everybody? And they're like, uh-huh. And so we did that. That's how Stop Complainers came about.
Mm,
I was going through Set the Standard, which is a little
yeah.
passport I have. And
Yeah.
and they said, wait, can you go back? And on what page? And we went and they said, that one, we spent probably 10 to 15 minutes on just how do you stop complainers? And I said, really? Is that what we're dealing with? And they said, yes. And so we spent the time. And then afterwards, I wrote a blog on it and that became a book. My publisher from another book reached out and said, you know, my consultant's legal guide publisher, Wiley, he reached out and he said, can you do a book on this topic?
Mm,
But who would have known if you're not aware of what your audience is doing and
yeah.
they're brave enough to stop you. I mean, think about it. Your group of 300, they raise their hand and they stop you. You got to honor that.
Oh, that's so good. And I'm going to put the link in the show notes for your TEDx talk and where to find your books and things like that. Linda Swindling, Hall of Famer, Linda Swindling, will be at the HR Southwest Conference, October the 13th to the 16th. And definitely need to check out her session, Ask Outrageously, the secret to getting what you really want. I love the piece of, I think everybody has a thirst for that negotiation piece. So every time I see you or hear you're going to be speaking, I want to be in that room because I always learn like one thing every single time. Hey, I do want to ask you, like, I don't know, for the listeners out there, I mean, you're a lifelong learner. And I can just tell that everywhere you go, you're trying to pick something up and then you're trying to put together something to share that. Any thoughts around something that might help the listeners continue their journey and their growth, like what you've done? I don't know, maybe something you've done.
Well, what I'm looking at doing is listening to more podcasts
Mm,
because, you know, like yours,
mm,
but find what your friends are listening to that pushes you a little bit. You know, invest in yourself.
mm.
If your organization won't pay for you to go to HR Southwest, find the money, do whatever you need to do, but don't shortchange yourself. And then the big one, go sit in something you don't know.
Mm.
I think that's the hardest because we sit in stuff. Well, you know, I'm in benefits, I'm in recruitment, whatever. We
Yeah,
go sit in the
right.
thing that we could teach.
Yes.
Whereas stretch yourself a little bit and say, I know nothing about this, but I'm going to go learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm finding myself wanting to go sit in other areas like AI. Like
Oh
I don't
yeah.
really use AI, but I'd like to know a little bit about it. Or there's lots and lots and lots of other areas. I try to dive into that. Oh my goodness, this has been so much fun. Hey, I want to ask you before we go to it's time to accelerate. I do want to ask you a question, and because I ask all this question to all of my guests, over 200 guests we've had on the show. You in my background, a lot of people can't see it. You're listening, but I have a brick wall in the back, and I call these my brick wall wall of leadership, and each brick is a piece of advice that I get, and you just keep stacking these bricks, and you just keep growing as a leader, as a human. Any advice that you were given that you just find yourself sharing that with others? Any thoughts around that?
The give before you
Mm,
get. That was a
mm.
big one for me
Joe Charbonneau.
because, and it more solidified what I had been raised with. And then that asking, I've changed it to, but it's from the Bible. It's an ask,
Yep.
ask, seek, no. And so ask, seek, knock, and I changed it to ask, seek, no. That
Mm-hmm.
helped. My mom used to always say, well, did you ask? Have you asked
Mm,
for this?
mm.
And that just reverberated. Sometimes our grandparents or our teacher or somebody, and my mom would always just, she would be at a store or butcher shop or something. She'd see a little person who was being talked over by a bigger person. And she'd say, I'm sorry, this young man was here. He has a question
Aw.
to ask you. And it just stayed with me. You got to
Ah.
speak up. You got to ask.
We learn so much from watching others, don't we?
We can.
Oh my goodness. I tell people all the time my growth has been from watching so many great speakers and great leaders. It's also from the not so great. Like, oh, I don't think I
Mhm.
want to do that. I want to move in this direction.
Yeah. And when you're doing that, ask yourself these questions. One is, what is it that's triggering me? Or
Hmm.
what is it that they're saying that I don't like doing? And then another tip somebody told me is if you have to pay attention and get the information, you say to yourself, this is the most interesting thing I've ever seen, and start taking notes. I've ever heard. Boy, this is interesting. And that'll help you too.
Shifts mindset.
Yeah,
Mindset. I love that.
learning.
Oh my goodness. And I guarantee you, if you or when you go to her session, you're probably going to get a lot more questions to be able to ask. This has been so much fun. Hey, I want to shift over and go to It's Time to Accelerate for the last few minutes of the show. One of the questions I like to ask is favorite city that you've visited as a speaker. I know you've been to many.
Yeah, I couldn't even pick one. I'll tell you what the core of it is.
Okay.
My favorite city is when I have some time to explore it.
Yes.
So sometimes your clients will say, "Hey, come go with us to this museum. We're going to go eat, or we're going to do this store. We're going to go visit." That's my favorite, is when they include me to go visit and see the different sites and just experience the city. So I tried really hard, and for different reasons. I've brought my family at one, or I met up with some friends, but usually it's when the client says, "Hey, come go do this with us."
I love that. I love that. I love exploring. Oh, okay. So what energizes you the most? I mean, you've talked about speaking, you've talked about connecting. What energizes when you think about the HR Southwest? What do you think about that's going to really energize you?
There's a positive nature and it's relationship oriented.
Mm,
And so nearly everyone I've ever met there is seeking to do better themselves, but also to help you do better. And that's not the case
mm.
for all the conferences. This one, as you wander around, they're saying, "Hey, well, what do you do? How can I help you?" And it's from the vendors, the exhibitors, the authors, the speakers, but it's the attendees. And they have a genuine love of learning, but also of supporting each other's learning and moving ahead.
I love that you shared that. I feel the same way every time I run in, especially to all of the volunteers. They're just
Ah,
so helpful.
they care. That's it. You get
Yeah.
these volunteers that roll their eyes. These Our volunteers love this. Can you imagine
Mm,
standing up there with a sign, ask me a question, or you're running and gathering stuff, and they're there to.
yeah.
They genuinely care about the people around them.
Yeah, I love that. I've got two more questions. In my book, Life and Leadership Lane, I have a chapter called Great Leaders Are Grateful Leaders. What are you grateful for?
Family, and then people who are willing to share their knowledge. When I
Mm,
was a lawyer, they were very kind, but they wouldn't always give you the secrets.
mhm.
And when people give you the secrets, this is how I got ahead, or this is what I tried here, or this won't ever work, or whatever. And HR did that for me. So I've always been grateful for the people that said, here's how I do it. You can do it too.
I have chills because I feel like you've done that for me. And so this has been so good. Okay, here's my final question. Linda Swindling, 10 years older, is around the corner and she's knocking at your door. And you're going to answer that door. What's she going to say?
You did what you were supposed to. You prioritized right and you gave back.
Mm.
Yeah. I, like a lot of you, I balanced family and a career. And then you have the older parents, and it can be really hard because you
Mm,
could get a big title in a fancy office sometimes, and sometimes you can have it all. And it might take you a little bit longer. You might do it a little differently. I think that's it, is you did it the best that you could do in the circumstances, and you've affected a lot of people. And that's, I want to positively help a lot of people. I
mm,
want to help them negotiate. I really think this is, I really think if you can put it in a negotiation framework, you can negotiate nearly anything. Now,
mm.
hopefully not your values, hopefully not your ethics, but I really do think you can get, if it's been placed in your brain that you want it, there is something like that or even better for you. And it will help you just do a framework through leadership or whatever you're trying to accomplish, getting along with someone. If you just can breathe and say, I know what to do here.
I love that. That's a great way to end it. When you shared that negotiating, not negotiating values, though, I thought about just now thinking there are some things you don't like. You are aware that you don't negotiate, right?
Yeah. I wanted
Oh,
to stay married. I married a nice guy, brilliant, and kind, and I thought he would be a great dad. And I wanted to stay married to him, and I wanted to raise kids that wouldn't be living with me
mm,
when they're 45. Not that there's wrong with any of that. And that it was just a goal. And so what was my best positioning? And that can be kind of hard.
mm,
Because this, Bruce, this puts you in the limelight, or even HR, if you're really good at it,
yeah,
they start coming to you all the time. You don't have
yeah,
a weekend, right?
yeah, yeah.
And it's interesting how you have to negotiate your life.
This is so great. Ask outrageously, the secret to getting what you really want. I am holding that up. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. And let me ask you, Linda, if somebody heard something, I don't know, before the conference, maybe they're not going to the conference, maybe they are, maybe they heard something and they want to connect with you. What's the best way for them to connect?
We'll have all the links, but we'll do a LinkedIn. That's always a great way. And then on
Mm,
my website, just I've got a little contact me. Just send it to me because I follow through with all of those. And you know what, Bruce, because you're you, I'm going to give them the Ask Outrageously challenge if they want to do it. We call it the
mm,
Smart Ask Challenge.
mm.
And that's a K on that Smart Ask Challenge. And I'll give you a code that they can go in and say what they want to ask for. What do you want to try? And I'll remind them. And that'll give them some resources as well. So we'll
I
give
love
them
it.
a couple of ways, but lindaswindling.com. I know, swindling attorney. You see why I'm a recovering attorney. But lindaswindling.com is the big website, and it's got a contact, or we'll do this other just for your people.
This is so great. The Smart Ask Challenge with Linda Swindling. This
I
is going to
know.
be so good. I'm going to put all the information in the show notes. Reach out. And by the way, just say, hey, I heard you on Life and Leadership Lane. Here's something you shared that made an impact for me. And it's going to be such a great connection. Linda, I appreciate you coming on the show today, just sharing your wisdom. And again, I have enjoyed watching your journey, and I can't wait to see what's ahead for you. Thank you so much, and mostly thank you for your friendship.
Well, YouTubers, this is such a strong program. People should just listen in all the time. This is such a good podcast.
I
So
love it.
thank you
Well,
for having me.
you're welcome. I can't wait to share it. I'll talk to you later.
Take care.